Welcome to another interview by Probe, the magazine of Caucus Hindu College. We Caucus are the discussion forum of Hindu College, University of Delhi, and we often educate, think, discuss, and write about ideas of national concern and social importance which involves subjects such as politics, economics, history, and sociology. Today we have the distinct honor of having Professor Arvind Mohan with us. Sir, welcome to this interview, and I hope that it will be a pleasure, a very good conversation with you today. So, as I said, Caucus is the discussion forum of Hindu College, and we usually, on a routine basis, have conversations with experts cutting across various disciplines. And recently, we had a conversation with Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia on the state of Indian economy. It's at this momentous time on the 30th anniversary year of the liberalization program that India undertook that we had this conversation with you. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. For our viewers, I would now proceed to introduce Dr. Arvind Mohan. Dr. Arvind Mohan is a professor of economics at Lucknow University. He occasionally appears at the Rajya Sabha TV as an economics expert and has contributed actively in terms of research to the Uttar Pradesh government, the World Bank, and the International Labour Organization. Thank you so much, sir. So today, the topic of our discussion would be analyzing the Indian economy through its sector. As we have seen that the Indian economy has been a contentious topic, always perennially it's a contentious topic, but with issues such as the second wave, farmers' protest, and other crises that have come to the fore, the Indian economy has become a hotly debated topic. We have seen the farmers' protest and the entire discussion around agriculture once again coming up into the fore with the general debate of liberalization versus state control and privatization. We have also seen other things like the banking sector crisis as well as labor crisis and the V-shaped growth recovery which was much talked by the government in the recent economic survey, as well as the second wave that hit the aspirations of the MSME sector. With that, sir, I hope that today's discussion will enlighten the student community as well as other experts who are regular viewers of Caucus on the Indian economy through a sectoral analysis. Now I hand over the next part of the conversation, which would be a Q&A session to Avnendra, who is a first-year student of economics at Hindu. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I would like to again thank Professor Mohan for accepting our invitation, and he's here today with us. So, sir, beginning with my first question, I would like to begin from that. There has always been a temperament of introducing reforms in the Indian economy by the policymakers if we trace back from the independence to this day. We recently completed, as it was mentioned earlier, we recently completed 30 years of the liberalization, privatization, and globalization economic reforms in India. So I would like to ask you, what is your assessment of these changes that were brought into the Indian economy?
See, let me first reflect on the situation in 1991. 1991 was the worst economic crisis of the 20th century that India faced. Or you can say after independence, this was the worst economic crisis. And so the key indicators of economic crisis, when you're looking at them, they include your GDP had plummeted to extremely low levels. Your maybe variety of other indicators, including your inflation, your fiscal deficit, everything was beyond nation's capacity to manage. Now, that's where we are starting from. And that is when a university professor who used to teach students like you, called Manmohan Singh, was called upon to take up the reins. And he, for example, if I am asked to do a similar thing, first thing which will come to my mind is that this is what I've been telling my students all my life. Should I do anything else? And I am sure that that is what Manmohan Singh must have thought. So he just picked out those books. And whatever he was teaching his students, exactly that is what he implemented in India. And that has been the most momentous reforms that this country has seen till date. The transformation was phenomenal. And we often refer them to as first generation reforms. As a matter of fact, Manmohan Singh is on record in Parliament when he says that India has to do so much, but everything cannot be done given our capacities and needs. So we are initiating first generation reforms, and these are truly speaking industrial in nature and urban. So first generation reforms are truly industrial and urban. And so phenomenal was its impact that these reforms, it allowed a crisis-ridden economy to catapult suddenly into the big league. So we jumped into the big league by the end of the 90s itself. Look at any critical indicator which Manmohan Singh as the finance minister of the nation was looking at, whether it was your fiscal deficit, whether it was your international trade, whether it was your industrial policy, everything, literally, we were able to bring down everything on track. So, and that is why these reforms are considered to be phenomenal. No, that's first part of the story. Second part of the story is that, again, during those days itself, the finance minister and the prime minister and everybody else who mattered, they did mention in the parliament, Manmohan Singh in particular, that these are first generation reforms and sooner rather than later, we will want to bring in the second generation reforms. And these second generation reforms will introduce the human face to the entire reforms story. In my understanding, the second generation reform for India will and should have two major pillars, two major planks. One of them has to be rural development, which will include agriculture, allied activities, as well as rural industry and small scale industry. That is the first plank, first pillar. And the second pillar of second generation reform has to be human development, where there are primarily two constituents, along with few other minor, but two major constituents happen to be health and education. And I've always believed and been saying wherever I've been deliberating that India is truly a three-engine aircraft. First engine we ignited in 1991, that is the industrial reforms story. That was the first engine we ignited. Remaining two engines, human development and rural development, they have, each one of them has at least as much capacity as the first engine had. And if we are able to ignite it, what we are calling the second generation story, second generation reform, I'm of the belief that irrespective of what happens in the world, whether the world sinks or floats, India will for the 20th century. And that is the path that we have to move forward to.
Right, sir. Really very well put, sir. So as you mentioned about the agriculture sector, which should be one of our priority sectors, my next question would be related to the agriculture sector. So the agriculture sector has been facing a crisis perpetually. Despite that, the government has proposed certain reforms, but they are also being opposed substantially. So, sir, what according to you are the reasons of the agrarian crisis in India, and what can be the different short and both short and long-term policy measures to improve it?
See, India is a very interesting story. Sometimes when you make rapid growth, that is what India did in, say, the 90s and, say, the first decade of this century. Such phenomenal growth, for example, between 2003 to 2010, India was able to double its GDP. And when your GDP doubles in such a short span, there are very few stories which can compare to India across the world. So when you are able to bring such phenomenal growth to the economy, one interesting thing happens is, you guys, those who are part of economics in some way, you must be knowing that we have been calling Giffen's good. You have been reading indifference curve and all those kind of things. See, when your income rises, you are in a position to consume those things which were beyond your reach till that point of time. And that is exactly what happened with India. Certainly your income rises, particularly for the middle classes, the income rose like anything. And when your income rose, we as a community, as a nation, we started asking for those commodities which we were not able to consume earlier. I think there is a report from Government of India, this is 2007 report, which indicates that in India, consumption for wheat and rice, it actually declined. Not in absolute terms, but in relative sense, consumption or the demand for wheat and rice declines during that period, and demand for few critical things: oilseeds, pulses, vegetables, and fruits, particularly these four items, it rises significantly. Now, these are critically the things which were beyond the capacity of large sections of population, but certainly because of rise of income, these became possible. So during this period and beyond, till date, as a matter of fact, what we are noticing is demand for these four commodities is rising. And when you are looking at India's growth story earlier than, say, 2007 or earlier than 2000, what we are finding is that whatever we have been trying to do in agriculture, for example, Green Revolution, it is all wheat-centric, it is all rice-centric, and these are critically the crops or the commodities which we haven't focused on. Even today, as far as oilseeds and pulses are concerned, major chunk has to be imported because we don't produce enough to feed this nation. So we import from the global markets. And India is such a big buyer. We are such a big buyer. Sorry. We are such a big buyer that when the message spreads that India has come to buy something, prices in the global markets, they rise because merely because India is now coming to buy pulses, oilseeds, etc. That is the significance of India in the global market as far as consumption is concerned. Now, when you are looking at, say, vegetables and fruits, another challenge exists, and that challenge is that rough estimate suggests, and this is slightly old estimate, that India loses close to around 2 lakh crore worth of agri produce annually. 2 lakh crore का खाद्यान्न सड़ जाता है. 2 lakh crore worth of agri produce goes rotten, is wasted annually. And these are your low-lying fruits. My understanding is that's where second generation reform, particularly agrarian or the rural sector reform, should start. If you are able to plug this loss, look at the advantages. Advantage number one is this will be the finest and the fastest growth injection. The kind of growth injection, because you will be adding 2 lakh crore to the GDP, certainly, merely by plugging this leakage or loss. So advantage number one, this is the easiest, highest and fastest growth injection which is possible at the moment in the economy. Two, Reserve Bank reports starting 2010 onwards clearly indicate that when you are looking at India's inflation, there are three major constituents, rather four. And two most important constituents happen to be imported inflation, that is petroleum related inflation, and agri prices or primary commodity prices. And roughly the weight comes to around 0.3 for each one of them, which means around 30%, close to 30% weight is petroleum and close to 30% weight is primary commodities. So if you are able to plug this loss, 2 lakh crore, this will be the finest anti-inflationary measure. Third, whose crop is lost? It is primarily the poorest of the poor, because his staying power is low, his capacity to carry his commodities to the market is again extremely limited. So it is the poorest of the poor who is losing the most. So this will be the finest anti-poverty intervention at the same time. So I've been hearing many policymakers and others, when they say that if you try to push growth, inflation becomes a casualty. If you are trying to manage inflation, growth becomes a casualty. I think here is an opportunity where everything is converging. Ek sade sab sade. So by one intervention, you are able to handle everything possible. So I think this is the low-lying fruit, easy reform, and if you are able to plug it, I think the kind of transformation which is possible is phenomenal. Agriculture, in my understanding, and this is the estimation of most of the international organizations, they believe that 21st century will be ruled by few critical engines. One of them is going to be agriculture as an industry. Another one is food processing. Third is textiles. And another one is going to be knowledge. So these are the key drivers which will drive economies across the world during this entire century. And India has critical advantage here. So second generation reform is not only due, is an idea whose time has come.
Thank you, sir. So we got some really profound insights from your answer. As you spoke about balancing inflation and growth together, and we currently are looking for a V-shaped recovery after the pandemic. So, but so the rising prices of fuel, if we take particularly the fuel, so its rising prices are hitting both the domestic consumption as well as the agriculture sector. What are your views on the same?
See, there are two sides to the story. One that, as far as imported inflation or petroleum prices are concerned, almost 80% of petroleum need of this country is met by imports. Nearly 20% is what we are producing for ourselves. So that's a critical challenge that we have, and this has been the story ever since. So this certainly is our challenge, and we need to address it. But we also need to understand that globally, the world has moved in a different direction. Non-conventional energy sources are a huge opportunity for a country like India. And many experts believe that the future oil is the solar photovoltaic cell, is going to be the future oil. And one of the basic ingredients for photovoltaic cell happens to be your sand and silica and those kind of things. So silica and those kind of things are India's opportunity also. So China for some time has been preparing itself significantly. So gradually, as your prices begin to rise, many of non-conventional sources of energy will become extremely viable. Already we have been observing that over a period of time, solar energy has already become viable. The kind of cost that is coming, there are critical examples from locations in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh and many other places where we have been able to buy solar energy at an extremely cheap price. And that's the story across the country now. Gradually, as this R&D investment in these direction it grows, I think India has to prepare itself for two things. One is replacing petroleum as an energy source, because end of the day, this is a limited resource and this is extremely polluting. And now there are opportunities like solar, maybe photovoltaic cell and other things. So not only that we should try to produce it for ourselves, we should also try to understand that the kind of importance that oil today has, or which has given importance to what we are now calling OPEC plus, the kind of importance that we have been able to give to them, we need to understand that we have to prepare for the future oil. And future oil is, at least photovoltaic cell, is going to be a critical area. So I think that is one major area that we should move on. But one interesting development which has happened recently, I think Reliance Industries, in their last GBM, they have made an extremely significant intervention. They are almost making a shift. Their main businesses in future is going to be photovoltaic cell, battery, and other related interventions. So I think 100 gigawatt is what they are planning to produce in one location itself. I think these are very encouraging developments, and when the private sector begins to take a lead in that direction, it becomes even more encouraging. So I think that is where India needs to move forward. This is one area that we need to be prepared, because otherwise China and few other countries will take up this market completely. This is an opportunity for future. For our current challenge also, I think petroleum is beyond our control, so we'll have to find ways of managing it. But the other part of the story is that why petroleum prices are rising. One of the reasons is that the production was brought down because of the pandemic. The OPEC plus countries brought this, I think they brought down production by around 10 lakh barrels or something because of this. Now, they have not been able to increase it to those levels. One. Two, demand is rising. So I think that's a very healthy development. Demand is rising because economic recovery is there. So we are finding significant recovery in US, we are finding significant recovery in China, and significant recovery in India. These are three major drivers as far as global consumption is concerned. So I think this is in some way is a healthy development because recovery is happening. But the flip side is it will impact us in terms of inflation, and without petroleum, at least in current circumstances, we can't do much. But I think this still is an opportunity, so we should always, challenge is an opportunity, and I think this is an opportunity that India should grab with both hands.
Right, sir. Sir, a follow-up regarding the same point, as you mentioned about the solar cells. So, in the recent budget, we saw that the government of India has increased the import duties for the solar panels. So, in order to ensure the production-linked incentive scheme to work, and India becomes a producer of solar cells. Do you think it is the right move by the government? Because there is a debate going on between various economists and thinkers that India might not become a producer, and in that way we are also hurting the private sector to not import the solar cells.
See, the challenges are very difficult. If you look at the last budget of Government of India, we left 9.5% of GDP as your fiscal deficit, which means around 12 lakh crore worth of fiscal deficit, which is in many ways a huge challenge, much bigger than the challenge that you are mentioning. And one of the reasons why this gap, or what we are calling the fiscal deficit, why is this rising? One of the key reasons is that tax mobilization, because of the pandemic, has gone down significantly. So we have not been able to mobilize most of the taxes, including GST and other taxes. This is the story at the national level. And the story at the state level is also very similar. States are finding it equally difficult. So fiscal deficit, this is the national fiscal deficit. When you look at a state budget, you'll find that deficit is rising like anything. So we have to do something to check that deficit. One of the option is taxing things like photovoltaic cell. So see, whenever you are taxing, you have to look at number of things, because few things you'll have to exempt in national interest and few things you'll have to raise it. Now, taxing photovoltaic cell is an advantage. If they become expensive, many of the local producers might become some kind of incentivization. So we might be able to incentivize local production, which I think in long run is not going to be India's loss. So both your current need of more revenue, as well as your long-term need of incentivizing maybe focused photovoltaic cell production in India, I think not such a big issue, because if you don't tax this, you'll have to tax something else, and the options are extremely limited.
Right, sir. So coming to our next question, the government has recently increased the 140% subsidy on fertilizers to the farmers. There has been a huge debate over the efficiency of such subsidy mechanisms and certain allegations of malpractices in the machinery itself. Can there be any better or more efficient way of supporting the farmers other than producing the subsidy?
See, subsidy is the most inefficient vehicle of supporting the farmers, because the problem with vehicle like subsidy is when it often or normally it doesn't reach the intended beneficiary. It is normally the big farmers whom the state doesn't want to support on the expense of the taxpayer. So we are wanting to support the poorest of the poor farmer, particularly. We are wanting to support maybe to increase production, but more importantly to support the poorest there. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen. Another important thing is, ever since 1950 until date, we have only been providing subsidies to the farm sector. So farm sector has been put on crutches. हमने उसको बैसाखी लगा दी. This is not empowerment. This is only putting the farming sector on crutches, and by putting crutches, you don't empower any sector. There has been a debate since long that agriculture has to be treated as an industry. Treat them at par with everything else. For long, and I've been a part of some of the committees which have been focusing on maybe doubling farmers' income and many other kind of things. The experience is otherwise. Ever since, and whatever policy framework I have been part of, I've always observed that the nation, whether it's at the national level or at the state level, we have always been focusing on the supply side in agriculture. We have been focusing on irrigation, we have been focusing on fertilizer, etc. I think there is a need for paradigm shift. And the shift has to be, start looking at from the other side, from the market side, from the demand side. Connect our farmers with the local, national, and the global markets. The moment you are able to connect them with the market, forget everything else. Because if there is an opportunity, if there is a buyer standing for your crop, everything else will fall in place. There will be a bank which will be happy to provide you with credit. Everything else, any kind of input will find its way because there is an economic opportunity. I think that is what we have to look at. Paradigm shift for agriculture is need of the hour. Stop looking at this sector as something who needs subsidy. This is a sector which has allowed you to remain afloat during the pandemic. It's agriculture which has allowed us to remain afloat. It's that important and that strong. Allow it to become stronger, allow it to empower itself, connect it with the market, and that is what we have not done till date. As a matter of fact, when the WTO agreement was being signed in 1995, if you go to the WTO deliberation, you will find that one of the major understanding at that point of time was bringing down agricultural production subsidy from a level of 30% points to 10. And this meant that the European countries, because 30% subsidy was being provided by European countries. Countries like India, we don't realize, our subsidy was close to around 8 or something, which means that if it was brought down to 10, India could have increased its subsidy. Although after that we brought down subsidy, but the reasons were domestic, not global. But if European countries were forced, and at some point of time it might happen, they had to do it by 2005, they haven't done it till date. But whenever they are forced to do this as per the agreement, if their subsidy comes down from 30 to 10, European farmer will not be able to sell a single piece of grain to their people, meaning it will become so expensive. And two countries, the two of the biggest agricultural producers, US and India, were expected to capture this. Our challenge is that India certainly is one of the biggest producers, but see, look at India's producing bowl. We call it food bowl of India. It consists of few states, most important being Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh, and to some extent Andhra, and few other, but primarily these. And whatever Haryana produces, Punjab produces twice as much. Whatever Punjab produces, Uttar Pradesh produces twice as much. But the challenge is, look at the biggest producers of Uttar Pradesh. Close to around 80 to 85% of farmers, their land size is non-economic holding, meaning they are marginal or very small farmers. They are not able to produce enough to meet their basic needs. Whatever, many of them have surpluses, but the size of surplus is very small, 20 kgs, 50 kgs, 100 kgs kind of thing, a quintal odd or less. Now, this is so small that carrying it to the local mandi becomes inefficient. So carrying it to the global market is extremely impossible. Individually, these are small, but if they are all collected, this is enough to feed entire Europe. So we had to create that conduit. That aggregation should have become possible. And we should have been able to create that conduit which connects these farmers to those global markets. We have not done it till date. As a matter of fact, in 1995, WTO provided 10 years for countries to make adjustments, make these variety of gaps, fill those gaps. We haven't done it till date. So I think time has come that we have to start looking at opportunities that how our farmers, small and big, can be connected to the local market, the state market, the national market, and the global market. If we are able to do that, trust me, the kind of opportunity there is, the kind of potential it has, is bigger than the value addition that will happen, maybe bigger than what Green Revolution could do for the farming community. It can be another revolution much bigger than the Green Revolution, connected with the markets.
Right, sir. That was an insightful answer. Sir, moving forward, we saw that the pandemic-induced lockdowns led to a gigantic turbulence in the lives of millions of migrant workers. The government has responded over the same by ensuring work guarantee under Manrega, ration distribution free of cost, and direct transfers, among other initiatives. What are your opinions on the working of such schemes like the PDS system and the Manrega? And what are the major issues that you find in them?
See, we saw this kind of situation when the global meltdown happened in 2008-9 also. Immediately after that, India was a huge beneficiary of Manrega because Manrega allowed increased consumption. So at least in the short term, as a short-term intervention, you need maybe increased consumption because your demand has gone down. That's our current challenge because of the pandemic. The demand has gone down. So you have to raise demand. So I think Manrega kind of intervention or the intervention that you are mentioning that the country is trying to do, they're extremely necessary, both as a social intervention because of the pandemic, there are a large number of people who are suffering. So they need temporary respite, temporary relief. I think these are interventions which are needed. But also this enhances your demand. So when your demand rises, it will generate, that demand will generate growth in industry and other sectors of the economy. So it actually becomes an impetus for your rising growth story. So that is needed at the moment, is most welcome. But at the same time, we also need to understand that we have to look at a large and longer story. For example, at the moment, there is another great opportunity which needs to be looked at. MSME is in great distress. Many of them are on verge of closure, finding it extremely difficult to survive. Now, I think merge Manrega and MSME needs to bring them together. Why can't we come out with some kind of policy framework where Manrega labor can be made available to the MSME sector? In any case, they'll be working somewhere. So rather than making them dig the same road and prepare the same road every time, send some of it to our MSME. And there will be two advantages. They'll be getting, maybe in some of them will be getting long-term sustainable employment. Your employment will rise and this will be useful employment. This will also help us, one, in making the MSME sector survive, and it might also in the medium term and long term enable some of the MSME to become large industry. Because this kind of a public, see, we have been looking at a possible public-private partnership in a very parochial way. I think this is one great opportunity for public-private partnership, where we are not partnering with some large industry. We are partnering with large number of MSMEs. And we need to understand that these MSMEs are small, but small is beautiful. Individually, they are small, but together they constitute India's biggest story. When they change, India changes. So it's very important that these kind of public-private partnership, and I'm just mentioning this one, there are many other opportunities which we need to look at. When we are talking about innovations, I think at the policy level also there is huge opportunity for innovation. This is one such example.
Yes, sir. I think that explained the situation very well. Moving on to our next question. Sir, as we know that you have been closely associated with the policy-making institutions at different levels. And unemployment right now has been a central problem. So what, according to you, is the correct plan of action for dealing with the extremely high rates of unemployment and also ensuring optimal utilization of the workforce by eliminating the disguised unemployment?
See, the answer is simple. Complete the reform process which we initiated in 1991. We have completed first generation reform. Second generation reform is pending. And as I mentioned earlier, the policymakers at that time itself had mentioned in the parliament itself that the second generation reform will introduce or will bring the human face to the reform process. So interestingly, content of the first generation reform were all large industry centric. They benefited those locations which were having some kind of an international connect, say on ports, etc., where international trade could happen. So either it supported the large industry or it supported those locations which had international connect. The mainland India and industries located there, they were all deprived of the opportunity because of the content. Now, second generation reform will actually complete the reform process, will transform the complete story. Look at industrial transformation in India. We have been observing that from 91, by 2005-6 or so, if you look at economic surveys, successive economic surveys suggest that industrial growth is going down. So till around 2003-4, it was rising year after year. Thereafter, it is falling. And year after year, it is falling. Reason is simple. See, unidirectional process of change, as we say in economics, unidirectional process of change always needs some kind of bottlenecks. And that's what's happening with India. If you want your industry to grow, you need demand from somewhere. Even in normal circumstances, forget the pandemic, forget the global meltdown earlier. Irrespective of that, you need demand, and that demand will come from other sectors like rural sector. See, I will recall an interesting story when President Obama was visiting India. This is Manmohan Singh's period. As is customary in US, Obama he was interacting with his media. Somebody asked, "Why are you going to India?" He said that I'm going to India to seek market access. And this is immediately after the global meltdown. Everything that those economies, US kind of economies, could do, that already tried. The truth was that if they have to revive, they need market. And that's what Obama was mentioning there. And where is that market in India? It is India's rural economy which has the market. By all means, we should make it available to the world. But before we make it available to the world, make it available to ourselves, to our industry, to our people. So open up the agricultural sector. This is a huge opportunity. When I was saying that agriculture needs to be treated as an industry, not merely because of some sympathy with agriculture. It will help the agricultural sector. It will help the entire economy. This is something which cannot be ignored long. So if you are able to do that, look at it. See, economics is about two things: the supply and demand. Supply is very important, but demand is as important, and we have the demand. So don't lose this opportunity. Don't lose this engine. If some other countries have some bigger advantage than us in, say, production or supply, we have this advantage which no other country other than China has. So use it as an opportunity which you already have. So I think the path is very simple. Move to second generation reform. One, it will complete your growth story for another 20, 30 years. You are assured of a double-digit growth. And this growth story from here onwards, because it will be focusing on rural sector, because it will be focusing on a small scale industry, and because it will be focusing on human development, this will benefit the larger section of the population. Because any growth story, any reform story is not for few individuals. It is for the 140 crore people of this country. Close to 140 crore people that this country has, the growth story has to be scripted in a way that it enables every segment of the population. And that can only happen if you complete this process. This completion of the process certainly will bring in more employment, will bring in more equity and more opportunity for the entire economy, for big and for small. And that is where the path is, that is where we have to tread. Often it is easier said than done, but it is doable and should be done.
Right, sir. I think that is the correct analysis. Moving on to the next question, sir. The banking sector has been in distress for a long time now. The non-performing asset mess and liquidity crisis are unprecedented. What are your views on the recent policy measures such as mergers or the creation of the National Asset Reconstruction Company or the funding for the liquidation in the public sector banks taken up by the central government? Also, what are the other actions that can be taken to solve the issue?
See, this is another extremely important challenge that the economy of the country is facing. Much of the banking sector, as we've been observing, is we have been seeing higher NPAs. And this has been the story for some time now. As a matter of fact, towards the end of the last century also, India faced a similar situation. And we found two interesting instruments used by the banking industry. One of them was one-time settlement. So Reserve Bank of India came out with critical guidelines for one-time settlement policies. So many of the lending institutions made use of that. Another important thing was hiving off, where in 2002, nation promulgated an act called SARFAESI Act. SARFAESI Act made it possible to hive off. Hive off meaning, suppose there is a sick industry. They have boiler and few other machines which, as the time passes by, it will go rotten, and whatever little value remains, even that will be lost. So sometimes it becomes important that whatever your sick enterprises have, whatever assets they have, some value is to be found in that. So, and that is where you just hand it over to somebody, some other buyer. Is exactly जो कबाड़ी काम करता है ना, ये बिल्कुल कबाड़ी वाला काम है. And kabad has lots of value. That is where this idea of SARFAESI Act came in. many of the banking institutions themselves, they came up with appropriate institutions for creating opportunities for hiving off. Now, banking industry made use of both these tools, and this enabled us significantly. India was able to, by I think 2005 or 6 or 7, India was able to bring down its NPAs significantly. In many of the banks, I think NPA level was less than 1.5% or even lower. So from around 4.5 or 6%, many of the institutions were able to bring it to 2%, 1%, 1.5%. So that was a complete transformation story. Here again, we are observing that for some time, our NPAs have risen much beyond what we saw in those days. I think it's historic high where we are finding both your net NPA as well as your gross NPA levels are extremely high. Now, when your NPAs begin to rise, your sustainability or survival of the banking institution becomes a challenge. A country like India, for that matter, no country can even think of allowing a crisis in their banking sector because of non-viability of the institution. That is what we have to look at. And that is what we have been trying to do. I think here again, we have been discussing about a bad bank, creation of a bad bank. I think time has come when a bad bank has to be created. Advantage of the bad bank is that all your bad debts will be transferred to this one bank. And when they are brought under one umbrella, the idea of, or the principle of, or the law of large numbers, as you call it in economics, it creates lots of opportunity there. So there will be some opportunities in the bad bank, and all other bank will become free of the bad loans. That is one critical thing which needs to be looked at. Also, current pandemic has also further created much more compromise. Some of it is not visible at the moment. I think over a period of time, as many of the delays that RBI is allowed because of those moratoriums, etc., which RBI is allowed, because of that, many of the sets are not being called NPA at the moment. But the level of NPA is much higher than what we are witnessing at the moment. So one interesting thing, RBI has been a great monitor. When you look at other monitors like Federal Reserve in the United States, the kind of mistakes that they committed in 2008-9, I think RBI has been much smarter than Federal Reserve and many other institutions. So one interesting thing that RBI has been trying to do over a period of time is enhance capital adequacy norms. And they've ensured that all kind of banks, whether domestic or foreign or private or public, all of them have been trying to enhance their capacities. They have been trying to enhance their capital adequacy. I think that process has to continue. Plus, we've also been observing that some of the private sector banks have been performing better than the public sector bank. ICI, HDFC Bank particularly. These two are critical examples. So we are finding lesser inefficiencies in these banks as compared to some of the public sector banks. So I think some learning has to be taken from the private sector banks. And of late, we've also seen that some of the weak banks have been merged with the larger, smarter banks. I think this will also be a great enabler. So on the whole, we are on track as far as the process of correcting the NPA challenges. So we're trying to correct it the way it should. But now there is an additional challenge. If you look at budgets of last 2-3 years, you'll find that Government of India has been making provisions for providing capital support to the banking sector. Generally, it has not been less than 25,000 crore per annum. And the hope was that maybe we might be able to provide several times larger support from the budget itself. Given the pandemic and given the fiscal deficit kind of situation, the Government of India also will find its hands completely tied in supporting the banking industry. So those are other challenges. But certainly, we have to find a blueprint. We have to find a roadmap for ensuring that the banking industry moves towards improved NPA situation. And the creation of a bad bank is certainly one critical idea which needs to be implemented as soon as possible.
Right, sir. Sir, coming to our the last few questions for today's session, I would like to bring the second wave of the pandemic, which is usually acknowledged as a demand side shock rather than a supply side shock to the economy. what are your views on it, and what steps do you suggest if you had to suggest some steps to the policymakers, what would they be?
See, I think it has been both a supply side and a demand shock, both. Also, see, we have been talking about a $1 trillion economy. We have been talking about a $5 trillion economy. So when you are trying to create a $5 trillion economy, and we are far away at the moment, if you start understanding that where will it come from, one of the key issues is that since 1950, when we started planned development in India, most important driver of transformation has been investment. So given your capital output ratio, which has ranged between 4 to 4.5% roughly, we have been able to mobilize, for example, our current investment levels around 30% of GDP, which means around 7.5% kind of growth is what is possible with your investment potential. Now, if you're wanting to take it to 5 trillion, the kind of growth that you need is much higher, more than double of what we are looking at today. So for a country like India, it might be around 18 or 19% kind of growth that we need in our economy. Now, where will it come from? So enhancing investment much beyond 30% of GDP will not be that easy. What are other key areas which we need to look at? And that applies. See, when you're looking at a COVID kind of impacted economy, sometimes your short-term measures will not help. You have to look at, that is what we did in 91 also. We merely did not look at the crisis. We converted that crisis into opportunity in 1991. And that is exactly what we need to do now. So this is a crisis. And let's look at that, how it can convert it into an opportunity. So when you are looking at these various kind of challenges, what kind of interventions are possible? This is what India needs to look at. As I've been saying time and again, that start looking at your second generation reform story. Second generation reform story, particularly when you are looking at the rural segment, one key thing is there that it will be short-term intervention, so it will bring lots of relief to large sections of the population, and it also will be enabling us to skip the long-term story. Another thing is that the kind of focus that we have been observing earlier, for example, health and education, health in particular, has not been getting that kind of focus that it deserved. I think much of this crisis may not have happened had we been investing in human development the way we have been wanting to. So human development is another idea which cannot be ignored any longer for many reasons. I was just mentioning about your $5 trillion economy. Investment is one driver which will bring your maybe around 7.5% growth can come from there. Total factor productivity can easily, maximum contribution that it can make could be around 4% odd, which also means that your current total factor productivity is contributing around 1.5% or so, which means around 2.5% or 3% odd contribution can easily be gathered from interventions like which enable us in enhancing total factor productivity. Human capital is another critical idea. And when you say human capital, your human development, interventions in health, because see, health has been a huge compromise for India, is one of the biggest reasons for bringing families and people below poverty line. When hospitalization and circumstances happen, many families, they enter into poverty merely because of your hospitalization expenses. And here what we have been observing is that close to around across India, in every state there could be slight variations, close to around 70% of total health expenditure is being incurred by people, which we often refer to as out-of-pocket expenses. And often it is the poorest of the poor who is spending the most. So when somebody falls sick in the family, in rural setting in particular, there is no support available, no adequate facilities available. So these guys end up landing with the quacks. So some studies suggest that around 56.6% of the population actually goes to quacks for treatment. That's their first reference. And that is, sometimes it happens that this guy might be in a position to provide you ORS, might be able in a have the capacity to provide you paracetamol, but they might end up maybe some kidney surgery or hernia surgery. That's where the problem begins. And when the complication rises, then these people start running to adequate care in cities. By that time, it's late. Your cost rises, and that is where sometimes you end up maybe selling your land or seeking all kind of high interest debts, etc. So large number of families enter into debt. So health has been a critical challenge which we have not been able to address. This is one area where investments have to rise, where state level and the national level expenditures have to rise. If we are able to rationalize our expenditure in these segments, and when I say this expenditure has to rise, the truth is expenditure is already happening. If state is spending 13,000 crore rupees, people, what we are calling out-of-pocket expense, that expenditure might be say 1 lakh crore. So major chunk of expenditure is happening, going to inappropriate providers, not contributing to health transformation. So we have to find ways of institutionalizing those out-of-pocket expenses. Unless and until you start focusing on that segment of expenditure, merely focusing on what says some state or the union government is spending or what finances institutions like World Bank are providing, these are peanuts. So don't miss the dollar for the penny. Focus on this out-of-pocket expense. This is too expensive, too large. So if you are able to institutionalize this, if you are able to rationalize that, and if it can be converted into investment in the health sector, I think lots of transformation can happen. These are all segments of second generation reform, which have to be focused on. So I think India is a land of opportunity. Agriculture, again, for example, states like Uttar Pradesh claim that the irrigated facility today, irrigated agriculture is more than 80%. But unfortunately, over the years, a large section of that 80% of irrigated land has got blunted because of silting, etc. So use your Manrega labor for cleaning or clearing those irrigation capacities which has got blocked because of silting. So I think these are the kind of, because once that happens, irrigation is a huge contributor again to your $5 trillion economy. If you're wanting to take the economy towards that, agriculture has to play a very important role. And there again, capacities like irrigation, which can be maybe revived or retrieved in very little effort using your Manrega itself. I think that kind of synergy, that kind of convergence is something which India has to look at.
Thank you so much, sir. That brings us to the end of our conversation. It was indeed a very good discussion with you. Sir spoke about the need for a second generation of reforms in continuation with the first generation reforms that we as a country adopted in 1991. It was indeed insightful to hear sir on issues such as the diversification required in the energy sector of our economy, wherein India needs to walk away towards renewable resources such as solar and hydropowered energy as compared to petroleum. But sir also mentioned about the need for human development and unlocking the potential of our rural sector. We also talked about subsidy, wherein sir mentioned that subsidy is not a means to empowerment but mere crutches to the farming sector, which are not allowing the exponential growth that can be seen in the sector. Sir talked about a paradigm shift, wherein the demand side should be, whereas the agricultural sector should be also seen as a demand side economy and should be linked to the not only state level markets and national level markets but also the global markets. We also talked about the social welfare schemes, wherein sir talked about the importance of schemes like Manrega, not in the short term but a very innovative and very original idea of merging that with the MSME sector and connecting it to the larger goals of the $5 trillion economy that India seeks to be today. We also talked about the banking sector reforms which are needed, the importance of a bad bank to tackle bad loans, and lastly we talked about the importance of the healthcare sector. Though the much attention that has been invoked for the healthcare sector in the recent times has been because of the pandemic, but sir talked about the perennial problems in healthcare and how we can ensure them in order to reach a better economic growth. I hope that I have done at least some justice in summarizing Sir's really thought-provoking and knowledgeable thoughts with us today. Sir, it has indeed been a thought-provoking as well as a very insightful time that we have spent with you today. There were a few points which we had not heard previously, and I hope that that innovation which inspires us can be, channeled through our thoughts, and we can also think about the economy in different ways and, suggest a few reforms if possible in the coming years. Thank you so much, sir, once again for joining
It's
us.
truly a pleasure to interact with you guys.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for having me here.
And hopefully, if it's